So welcome everybody to this interesting conversation with Dr. Peter Garbutt we have today. We are going to discuss the influences of shoes on our biomechanics and our overall health. And so first I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Peter Garbutt.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to be here.
So Dr. Peter has a massive list of credentials from university studies such as Bachelor of Science, Masters of Chiro, Diploma, or possibly more of Sports Chiro.
Masters. Masters
of Sports Chiro. He's a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Chiropractic Education, a Fellow of the Faculty of Sports and Exercise. He's the past President of the International Sports Chiropractic Federation, past President of Sports Chiropractic Australia, past President of ACT Branch of Sports Medicine Australia, and probably others, Peter. And he's also the owner of Enhance Healthcare and the owner of Enhance Running, and a published author. So a lot of things. So I'm going to start with this conversation with why I find this fascinating, because I was introduced to this concept by Dr. Peter, which I might just call you Peter if that's okay.
Works for me.
Probably about 15 years ago when I first did your Enhanced Running course. And the reason I did it was because I'd had my history of gymnastics, history of shin splints. I enjoyed running, but I would get a lot of fatigue in my legs without being able to push my cardiovascular system very well. So my legs would kind of hold me up. And so I decided to do one of Peter's Enhanced Running courses and realized that my whole technique, I had really well supported shoes. Because of my shin splints, I'd been kind of thinking that I needed support in my shoes. So I had well supported shoes, and it really had changed my running technique. So I learnt heaps by doing that course with you. And then I went on to do the Enhanced Running Technician course and learnt a lot more, including a whole heap of research that I didn't know about. And I just thought it would be really interesting to have this conversation so lots of people kind of understand this whole thing. So based on that, maybe we should start with how shoes influence our mechanics and our overall health and how we move and how that whole thing all started.
Yeah, sure. So, shoes have been around for a long time, and the primary purpose of shoes originally was simply one of protection. Protecting the feet from the elements, from the cold, from the heat, from things that are very sharp. And so, which allowed humans to travel further, longer, and keep their bodies in better condition whilst they did that. Over the years, shoes have developed through various means and mechanisms, and mostly fashion. And so we've seen all sorts of things such as heels and then foam and all sorts of things in the shoes. Most of them well-meaning, but not always with the outcome that we might expect from them. So what we do see with children when they start wearing, say for example, a school shoe which has a heel on it and a hard sole, is they start to increase their stride length. They increase their stride length, which some people might think is a good thing for running, but it's not always a good thing for walking, and it starts to create different mechanics. And it's important to understand that we don't always deal with good and bad, righteous and evil. Things are just different. And so we know that foot muscle activation within the foot is different in a shoe than it is without the shoe. Movement mechanics are different in a shoe as they are outside of the shoe. And so what we do learn from knowing that is when we might be able to utilize some of these to our benefit and what impacts they may have on our health and our movement patterns. You certainly see a change in children's running technique when they hit around about the year 5 or 6 mark. And they start to run more like the adults we might see in a fun run, as opposed to the free moving kids that we see running around the beach and the park, and particularly running around in summer without any shoes on. So we do see a change in movement pattern occur.
Should we keep kids out of shoes for as long as possible, or what's the approach we should have around that?
Yeah, it's generally accepted now by most professionals, whether they be physios, chiropractors, podiatrists, doctors, that kids should be moving as much as possible barefoot for as long as possible. The concept that we did have at one stage of supporting a child's foot early on was well-meaning but potentially misguided, in that the arch of the foot doesn't necessarily develop until the child is anywhere from 7 up to 13. And the research studies are fairly diverse as far as trying to identify that point that we have a mature arch. But most people will agree that a foot that is active and strong and adaptable is a healthy foot.
And what about, can you explain to people the influence of like the sensitivity and the homunculus and the brain as it's developing as well with barefoot as opposed to shod?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So one of the things that we do see with the brain and the sensory cortex is that the space set aside for the foot is almost as large as that of the hand, which tends to indicate that we're supposed to be receiving a lot of information from our feet. Some 200,000 nerve receptors in the soles of our feet mean that they're supposed to be being used for balance, for awareness of the ground that we're on, how we should respond to it, and muscle activity that helps us to dampen forces appropriately, to exert the right forces to get off the ground, and to stay stable when we're on the ground. And you see a really good example of that if you put a toddler from barefoot into, some nice looking but very thick shoes. They start walking like a robot. They regress in their walking patterns because they can no longer feel the ground. And it doesn't take a genius to suggest that, well, if the child can feel the ground and this is where they're learning, then they're going to walk better and they're going to learn better. So we can certainly change the way people move by taking away that receptor of information about how our body should be moving and relating to the ground and the world that we're in.
So we really should not only biomechanically and muscle development, but we should also be keeping them in out of shoes for as long as possible, and maybe more freer shoes for their brain as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we also, when we look at a normal gait pattern, the toes are supposed to spread. It's a part of the balance mechanism for propulsion. And if a foot doesn't allow the toes to spread, then that obviously impacts our ability to move. Now, it impacts it on a small measure, and it's a way that most of us get used to because that's how we may have grown up, wearing shoes that held our feet snug. And so we can adapt it, we can learn. Is it optimal? I would suggest probably not. But it's not like we're going to cripple people by our kids wearing shoes. It's just, I think there is an alternate pathway which has them growing with healthier feet, stronger feet, and more adaptable feet.
Yeah, so there's like different shoes are going to affect the physical body in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most extreme of that we see is with high heels. And you notice that a person walks differently in high heels. Their posture is different in high heels. We see an increased lumbar lordosis. And their ability and agility to get around changes dramatically. So if you consider that one end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum might be barefoot or a minimalist shoe that allows as much feeling of the ground as possible and therefore adeptness to react to the ground and respond.
So for me, I am never going to not wear high heels because I'm fairly short, but I think I would spend, I reckon, about 90% of my time in minimalist shoes. Can you explain to people what minimalist shoes are?
Sure. So there's a range of shoes within the minimalism category. And they've been described in different ways over the years. Blaise Dubois probably has one of the best categorizations of minimalist shoes, because minimalist may mean that there's not much sole there. So for example, one of the things that we know is that if there's a foam midsole in there, then we start to create like a baffle which doesn't let as much information through to the foot. So it cushions the foot so I can't feel the ground as much. We also know that decreases balance. it may be a hard sole that doesn't allow the foot to adapt to small alterations in the ground. Now, if we look at a shoe such as an Ultra or even a Hoka, they suggest that they're a minimalist shoe because they have a low drop or difference between the heel and the toe. So the drop is one of the things
that... Do you have any examples like close by that you can grab for our audience?
I've got a couple of shoes I can go and show you, sure.
Yeah, maybe that'd be good to show people as you're talking.
Sure.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, so we'll get one of those, we'll get one of those, we'll get one of those. What else have we got that might be useful?
Have you got a 5-finger in there?
I do actually. I have, where's it? Ah, there's one. 5 fingers. No, I'm just trying to see if I've got a shoe that's got a reasonable heel on it, but outside of my cowboy boots, I don't think I do. That's all right. I've got a few different shoes here which I can show you differences in minimalism. Okay. Let's come back to my chair. All right. So when we're looking at various types of shoes, this one here is a New Balance Minimus. So it's classified as a minimal shoe in that it doesn't have as much midsole as other shoes might have. And it's got a 4mm drop between the heel and the toe. So the shoe's on a ramp, ramping downwards, which is how most modern athletic shoes will be. Some of them will have a drop of up to 13 centimetres, which is considerably more than this one. But this is, as I say, classified as minimal because it's got a low drop on it. It also doesn't have any significant arch support in there, and it's quite a malleable shoe as well. So if we take the shoe here, we can twist it, we can bend it, and so forth.
And there's no support in the heel or around that heel area either. If you squeeze it.
No, so it's quite a soft heel. Mm-hmm. So if we compare this to what we might traditionally know as a good shoe, it doesn't have many of the features of that supportive shoe that we've been led to believe is a good thing. Mm-hmm. The strong heel counters, the support through the midsole, and a shoe that doesn't move very far at all. We're led to believe that's the supportive shoe, and for some people that's the right shoe. As I say, I don't actually have one of those with me, but this, that's one that does have a drop. Now, if we look at a shoe that has a 0 drop but has more cushioning, the Ultra here, you'll notice there's quite a lot of cushioning through the middle, but the heel and the toe level are exactly the same. So that's what we call a 0 drop shoe. It's another classification of a minimalist shoe. This shoe also has a fair bit of mobility in it, but it's a bit stiffer than the New Balance one, just because there's more foam through the sole there. You'll find that it's got quite a wide toe box, which allows the toes to spread. So fairly good lateral foot movement in this one. But again, we've got a bit of a baffle between the foot and the ground.
And when would you choose, when would you personally choose that one compared to the first one?
So for my own running, I'll actually change through different shoes all the time. Just so that my feet are adaptable to different areas. Now, one of the things that got me into minimalist or barefoot running were knee problems. And one of the things we do know is that when there's more cushioning, we actually tend to load the knees more. And so my knees will be a little bit sore when I start running in the more cushioned shoes. My body will adapt to that now, as it's learnt to. But when we're looking at the different shoes for different feet, if we want to take load off knees, then we need less padding in the shoe. If we want to take load off feet and ankles, then we want more padding in the shoe. So for example, I'll often recommend patients that have had a triple arthrodesis in their ankle or other significant foot problems that they should try Hokas, and we generally get some good success there. Whereas people with knee problems, that can cause further issues.
Because a lot of people with knee problems think they need more support in their shoes, right?
Yes,
so can you
absolutely.
explain to people why that's the case?
So the gearing between ankles and knees means that our body needs to get off the ground when it hits the ground. It needs to be able to adapt and accommodate forces. And depending on where your foot is able to manage those forces depends on where it's likely to go. So for example, if the foot's unable to move a great deal, then the knee becomes the shock absorber for the body. If the foot is, and our foot is supposed to absorb shock. Our arch is supposed to go up and down. That's part of a shock absorption management system. So when that's limited by a lot of cushioning and support around the foot, which doesn't allow the foot to respond in time, then the knee tends to be the shock absorber that takes the load there. So that's one of the ways that we can utilize different shoes to help with different parts of the body, and why, whilst I prefer for myself a minimalist shoe and very little between me and the ground, that's not always the case with everybody. So when we look at shoes that have less between us and the ground, we come to a Vibram 5-finger, and these were very much a part of the initial, the most recent barefoot movement. Originally a water sports shoe, and people found they could run in them. So you'll notice there that there is actually no midsole in them. The toes are all individual, so they can actually spread and move, and there is no support whatsoever in this shoe. On a similar basis, sorry?
They're my personal favourites.
Yeah, and the Vibram 5-fingers are a lot of fun. Then we've got the Vivos. So this is the Vivo Primus, a specific running shoe. And so, again, they have no support whatsoever. They have a wide toe box which allows the toes to spread, and very good feeling between the foot and the ground. And so this is sort of, these and the Vibrams are sort of our end of the road minimalist style shoes. And then it goes up through the other ones that I demonstrated before. I don't have any Hockers here, but they're another one that comes into that same realm.
Okay. And so for me, when I decided that after I'd done your enhanced running course, and I decided I wanted to start to move towards more barefoot, I did it gradually, because I was in ASICS, nice stable, not too much movement through the midfoot and rear foot. And so I think the first thing I did was I found some Nike 5.0s, Nike 3s, and then I went to Nike 3.0s, and then that's when I went to Vibrams and Vivos, and now I pretty much stay in Vibrams and Vivos for running, walking, anything like that, and all my work shoes are Vivos. And I just much prefer it. And if I go salsa dancing and put on heels, I just make sure I get in my barefoot shoes the next day, just to keep my feet strong, my muscles not too tight. I just find my calves will get really tight if I do that. So is that the type of process? Obviously you wouldn't want people to go from, a nice stable Beast or ASICS and think that this is a great idea and straight into a barefoot sort of shoe. But if they think, oh, well, that sounds interesting, maybe I should think about this a bit more, what sort of process do you think?
So I mean, you've covered a couple of points there. One is that you like your heels, and that's great. I like heels too. And the way to balance out heel usage is exactly what you're doing, and that is spending plenty of time allowing your foot to move and be adaptable and strong the rest of the time. And then you're afforded the ability to be in heels some of the time. It's not that different to nutrition. We're allowed to have an ice cream, but we can't have ice cream all the time. And if the cleaner we're eating the rest of the time, the less impact that indulgence might have on us. So when we look, and the second is the transitioning of shoes. And as you mentioned, going through the different Nikes, which is a similar way to which I did my transitioning. That's one way which will allow you to protect to a certain extent your running load that you have. So say, for example, you've been training and you're running 5Ks on a regular basis and you'd like to change your type of shoes, then a gradual change in the type of shoe can allow you to move to a more mobile shoe and still do the same sort of kilometers. So what we've got to understand here is all about loading. So less shoe means more load on your foot. Our muscles do work differently. Our feet do work differently when we go through different types of shoes. And so doing a gradual transition like that from shoes means that we can get to a more full movement shoe eventually.
So the other way, all the muscles, basically training up your muscles and joints to work more efficiently, so you can do that without damaging yourself.
Well, it's a little bit tough to say more efficiently. Differently is the right way. And so this is one of the things that we found in recent years with the studies, is that it's simply different muscle pattern activations that we see with different types of shoes, whether it's a full supportive shoe or a minimalist shoe or barefoot. And so we certainly get more muscles activating when we're looking at a minimalist shoe or barefoot, but consider it a different muscle activation pattern. Mm-hmm. The other way that we can do it is actually, if we have no training load to protect, is we can gradually start from a very low load and work our way up using just a minimalist shoe. Now, one of the important things to recognize with a minimalist shoe, and this is where a lot of people got into trouble with the most recent barefoot movement, was that the minimalist shoe protects the skin of the foot, but doesn't give great indicators for the bones and the muscles and their adaptability. If you have no shoes on, you learn pretty quickly where your limit is as far as what the skin can take. And it's generally actually a pretty good safety net for the muscles and bones above them. So we need to be careful about overdoing it from that perspective. And so slow and steady is really the message there, whether you're transitioning your type of shoe down or whether you're building your kilometers up. Mm-hmm. Our feet are incredibly adaptable though.
Yeah. Do you also recommend that, if people are specifically trying to get their feet to work better, that like you said, changing your different shoes, so you're not always in the same shoe, not always using the same muscle pattern in that particular type of shoe, and also looking at different surfaces that you run on?
Yeah, I tend to think that variability is the key to health in all things, whether that's in our diet, in our movement patterns, in our learning patterns. And so a variable surface that we walk or run on is good, and variable shoes, as I say, helps you to stop creating an overuse or overload type pattern with doing the same thing all the time, and also keeps your body and your brain awake and adaptable to what we're doing.
What was I going to say? Something along those lines. So, like changing from grass, footpaths, roads, beach, soft sand, hard sand, just vary everything is not a bad idea generally.
Yep, it's a good idea. The thing to recognise there as well is that you're going through different loading and different types of loading. And people often think that grass is a kinder surface to run on than a footpath, particularly if they're looking at decreasing the padding in their shoe. The thing is that your workload is actually much higher on grass and even higher again on sand, because there's a thing called a stiffness coefficient, which is the interaction between our body and the ground that allows us to overcome gravity. And if the ground is soft, we need more energy within our body expended to get off the ground. If the ground is hard, we can get off the ground much easier. And so managing that stiffness coefficient becomes part of the load of running on the different surfaces. So you might run 5K on the footpaths or on the road quite easily, but if you went to run 5K on the beach, on the soft sand, you'd find life pretty tough. And again, similar to our high hills, I like to sort of go to these extremes to demonstrate where we see these issues come up. And so, consider the grass as part way between the sand and the hard road, and don't expect that just because you can run 5Ks on the road, you can automatically run 5Ks on one of these other surfaces. So you may need to consider that, again, if you're running hills, that's another load. So you're probably not going to run a 5K hill and expect to be as adept as you are running 5K on a flat. So understand where your loading strengths are, and therefore how you may adapt that to other areas.
And maybe even where your problems are. So then you could think about changing things to avoid the problems. Yeah, and what about just taking your shoes off generally and just having a bit of a trot with no shoes on, just to feel the difference between being in shoes and being in no shoes, and how your running pattern naturally changes by just doing that?
Yeah, look, that's one of my favourite things to do. Taking the shoes off automatically starts to utilise those 200,000 nerve receptors in the soles of our feet. It gives our brain information about each step. It's travelling at a speed at which the brain can adapt your foot strike within 1 foot strike. It's that fast. And so the one thing I'd say there is that we do know that feet fatigue during running. And this is where the longer distances, it's actually safer to have a more supportive shoe early on until your foot adapts completely. And so if you're going to do some barefoot stuff, do it at the start. Allow your brain that learning process, allow it to feel the ground, see how you should respond and react to the ground, and then put your shoes on and go and do your run from there. As opposed to doing it at the end as a wind down, where your foot might be fatigued, the muscles are less able to manage the loads. And so it's actually much safer to do a bit of that at the start of the run rather than the end if you're going to do that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And is everything you've said have got some good research to support it?
Yeah, look, this is one of the things that has developed remarkably over probably the last 15 years, is the research around bare feet, how we use them, and also some of the claims that might have been made previously that it's going to cure all that ails you. That's not the case. But we do see, as I say, plenty of research regarding the neurological impact of bare feet and the areas of the brain that are stimulated, and as I say, the sensory cortex, the muscle activation between barefoot and shod running. There is still some conjecture about whether it actually makes you more efficient with running and things like that. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to a conditioning effect. Whenever we try and change conditions, say, for example, there's been a lot of research on seeing whether hill striking is more efficient than forefoot striking. But if you take somebody that's used to doing one thing and then automatically get them to do something else, they're going to be less efficient because they're not as well trained in that movement. And so it's an area where we need to be quite cautious when we're having a look at the research to evaluate what the so-called best thing to do is. We need to be very conscious of what is the best thing for you as an individual, what is the best thing for the patient in front of you. And, again, when we look at barefoot stuff, I would suggest that for kids, there is no reason for a supportive shoe unless they have a specific foot pathology. With an adult, if they've grown up wearing supportive shoes, we need to have a good reason to change that. And they might live a much more comfortable life continuing in supportive shoes rather than looking at a minimalist or barefoot shoe. And so adults and kids are quite different from that perspective, and that's a conditioning perspective. But it's also worth noting that the adaptability of our feet is incredible. I was very privileged to be working at the Rio Paralympic Games, and had the pleasure of treating a table tennis player there. Now, this guy had no arms. So he played with the bat in his mouth. And he tossed the ball up with his foot. Now, I'm not sure about you, but for me, the only interaction, or the only outcome of an interaction between my foot and a ping pong ball is the ball's no longer round. But this guy was able to pick it up, spin the ball, do amazing things with his feet. Now you say, wow, that's remarkable. Somebody who doesn't have any arms, they can do that. But what I found most remarkable was he was actually born with arms. And he lost them both in an accident when he was 9. So his foot has nothing different in it to yours and mine. The only thing that changed was a necessity to learn to use it better. And so that agility, that strength, that control he has in his foot, we have everything within our foot to be able to do that.
It's amazing.
If it was necessary. So, you know, I like to use extremes as examples of, you know, how the body works. There's an example of what is possible if our body needs to. But nobody, I would say that the foot is probably the most neglected part of our entire body. We wrap it up. We don't let it see sunshine. We don't strengthen it. We don't exercise it specifically. In fact, we do whatever we can to stop it becoming strong and agile. Yet we know that at the start of summer, a hot road is hard to walk across, and by the end, we can stroll across it without no problem, without any problems, and barefooted. You know, we say we get our summer feet on. That's an adaptability that's absolutely normal.
Yeah, it's amazing. Is this stuff in the book that you've written? What was the book you've written?
The Running Machine, a user's guide.
You would have stuff
I run through most of this stuff in there, and also discussing things like, and I mean that book's fully referenced. Concepts such as, you know, if you are looking at transitioning, low load time in minimalist shoes is a good time to start to develop foot strength and agility, and that's where, you know, brands such as Vivo, Barefoot, I think are a wonderful, wonderful partner in helping people have healthy feet, because it's not just about the running shoe and saying this is all about performance. It's about, this is a lifestyle, and we can start to develop better agility, better strength, better mobility in our feet in those low load times, such as you say, when you go to work wearing Vivos, and I do the same. And, you know, sometimes it feels like I'm cheating because
shoes are terrible, hey?
Sorry?
Men's work shoes.
Oh yeah.
They're
generally, yeah. Well, they tend to have a heel, just not quite as high as a woman's one. They tend to be very narrow in the toe, and a hard sole. Yeah. So I feel like I'm wearing
alternatives for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm wearing my slippers in a work shoe, which is kind of nice.
Well, that's awesome. That's probably a good place to stop. So could you just let our listeners know where they can find you, like your book and websites and enhanced running and all that kind of stuff? And I'll also put it in the notes.
Yep. So heading to enhancedrunning.com.au or enhancedrunning.com, you'll find links to the book and running practitioners that there are around the place. And enhanced.com.au will find me at the clinic here in Canberra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peter Garbutt. I'm sure that's a very interesting conversation for everyone, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks for your time, Sarah.